But one thing about the Gaza hospital strike is there's two things happening at once, and both of them are out of either necessity or perceived necessity. So on the one hand, and I mean, you mentioned this to me, right, where you were like, oh, there is something disrespectful about the number of, people that are like pro-Palestine that, maybe are just kind of like against further investigation because they feel like, all right, what if this isn't going to break in our direction? Meaning like, oh, Israel is the one that did the airstrike and it is responsible for the destruction of the hospital. They feel wedded to it on some level, right? Because it's very similar to the George Floyd stuff. I remember talking to like people that I know about George Floyd in 2020. And the way that I phrased it was just if you look at the fact that everything that's been going on in Black America is like really like under the hood. People don't really notice it because neighborhoods are segregated. It's not happening to me, right? People aren't dying around me. I don't have to grow up with it's just kind of crazy how you go to like any, given like, all Black or majority Black high school and like whatever like city setting or whatnot. So many like literal kids there, right? We're talking about teenagers have friends that are just dead, right? And they're dead because of murder of some sort. That's not an experience that many, or most white people in America have, right? It's not gonna be part of their lives. And because of the segregation, like it's easy to neglect all that. So it finally takes something like, all right, if you're not going to listen to us when we talk about the wealth gap, if you think slavery is no longer relevant, if you believe that police brutality isn't real or it's not a big deal, if you don't believe that just like general police, like street harassment, which never ever makes it to any statistics ever, if you believe that's not relevant, the only thing we have left is like literally our physical bodies, which is, okay, we're going to catch one of these cops murdering someone on camera in a way that is like totally undeniable. And maybe that's going to be enough to like, if not do something about it, at least cause an uproar, at least have people talk about it, whether it's cynical or not, like at least there's going to be something in the air, right? Related to everything that we've been talking about. And that's just kind of how it's been, right? I mean, look, you could go through like so many Black neighborhoods now. You're going to see homeless people. You're going to see people asleep in their own piss. You're going to see all this kind of shit. But like you put that in a poster somewhere, you put that in a video, people would either ignore it or they would laugh at it. But if you have this video of a murder, maybe something's going to happen, right? So there is this kind of like odd martyrdom that it's not willing, right? It's just like forced, right? No one's signing up for this. But that's just kind of how things end up playing out. And the same thing is happening, with the Gaza hospital strike, in the sense that we've already had over 1,000 kids killed before we even get to the hospital strike, right? We've already had 3,000 casualties before we get to the hospital strike. We had in Castlet and Protective Edge, half of the medical infrastructure leveled a second time. We had dozens of ambulances that were explicitly fired upon according to all these human rights reports. We have personnel that was fired upon. We have one hospital that was damaged in 2008. Israel came back and they finally destroyed it in 2014. So we have all that. Nobody's paying attention to it. And nobody's paying attention to it even during the siege. And now it has come to this symbolic, superstitious thing that is like imbued with all this meaning. Who done it? Who done it? Did Israel do it? Did Palestinians do it? And that's going to be, it's kind of like, like a child walking around like, please God, please God, please God. If you do this for me, I promise that I'm going to do this, or I promise I'm going to do that. The same thing is happening. And it's just so laden with superstition and so much meaning beyond, the scope of like really, really what's happening. Because really the big picture, like I always want to bring it back to the big picture conversation. But in terms of strategy, a lot of it just comes down to, look, we've already said, 1,000 kids have died. You said nothing. We already said over 3,000 died in these other places. Like nothing happened. Maybe something will happen here, right? So, but on the other hand, like Israelis are now so like this is now I think so critical to their identities. Like it does really feel like with all this like buildup going down. First of all, like Israel has already like maybe half of the goodwill they accumulated after the Hamas massacres has been already sort of like kaboshed, but it like this other part of it, it feels like if the evidence ultimately, again, it's Thursday the 19th. I know that the U.S. said that we have evidence, well, but I don't, I'm not going to take this stuff seriously until like, we got to see something real. We have to see some kind of assessment. We have to see some investigation results. Like that's just how anything like this should work. But if the evidence does break against Israel's favor, it feels like almost as if like the country's going to like vaporize before our eyes. It feels like they're going to disappear, like in some ways. Like it's very odd.
I do understand the symbolic importance of this. I mean, and the material importance, of course. I mean, it's the hundreds of people dying in an instant. I mean, we have to know what happened here. I mean, I think the thing that kind of gets me though is I do think this is sort of, I mean, so much of discourse is predicated on this idea that if people just knew what was really happening, then it would change. I mean, if Israel did something this abject and this craven, then maybe it would finally crack things open and things would start swinging in the direction that we want it to happen. Maybe you would, and maybe it's the case that you would have less civilian support of Israel if they just nakedly bombed a parking lot full of hundreds of like
I think that's a huge part of it too. Yeah, I think that's a big part.
But I don't think it would actually change the geopolitical calculus of the situation all that much, because the countries that are on Israel's side, they're pretty pot committed at this point. You know, I mean, like America is America most of all certainly not going to withdraw support of Israel away because something like this happened. I mean, because they've never done it before. You know, it's not like this is the first time that Israel has. I mean, Shireen Abu Akleh, I think I might have gotten her name wrong there, but and she's an American citizen, and she got murked by Israel.
Literally murdered, directly targeted. Yeah. And CNN released that. That's a shocking part. I did not expect CNN, of all places, to release the sort of like, tell all analysis of the fact that, yes, she was a journalist, an American citizen that was explicitly targeted by the IDF for being a journalist in that area. And that's just kind of how it went. And this is another crazy part. Like, think about it. There are nation states out there that, because of geopolitical strategy, if you as a citizen, as an American, are going to go over to some of these places and they like straight up execute you and don't hold anybody accountable, the US is not going to do anything for you or your family. They're not going to release statements. They're not going to demand some sort of investigation. They're not going to demand some sort of like criminal justice. They're not going to do anything at all, right? They will just move on as if it didn't happen. I mean, we saw that, Grant, he wasn't a citizen, but he was a permanent resident. The Khashoggi murder, right, in Turkey by Saudi Arabia. We saw it happen.
We do too, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, we do the same, a little bit differently, granted, but still, yeah.
But like WikiLeaks released a video of like American guys in a helicopter just like murking, a whole group of people, whether they were enemy combatants or civilians is like unclear, but just like yucking it up, as they like machine gun like hordes of people from a helicopter, some of which were pretty like established as civilians. So like the reason like America can't condemn this, because to condemn this would be to condemn ourselves, to impeach our like the base. I mean, it just basically becomes a utilitarian. I mean, like if Israel gets implicated in this, it's just going to become a utilitarian analysis. Like it's a tragedy that this happened. We'll have to, whatever was the field commander that made, because I don't think that this was like done from on high, like if this was,
it's just someone behaving like an insane person, and there's no consequences.
Yeah, exactly. Like we'll have to hold this field commander accountable or something like that. But to say that this was a predictable and perhaps almost inevitable consequence of the way that the conflict itself is structured in the first place is to say that, that basically everything that America does is on the world stage is like practically unjustifiable, So that's why, I mean, ultimately, I completely agree that this follows a consistent pattern of behavior that Israel has engaged in the past, to deny responsibility until people care less, and then they can, kind of come out and say, upon further analysis, we realized that this actually might have been us. We're very sorry. We didn't mean to. Please.
It's crazy how that happened also with the 2018 Gaza protests, where it's like we literally had hundreds of mostly civilians that were just straight up massacred. They specifically targeted that 20 or 21-year-old girl that was this like medic, and not only did they explicitly target her, this is what I talked about in the essay, and murder her like a sniper, like literally. They then released like doctored, like selectively like edited footage that made it seem as if she was saying that she was a willing human shield for Hamas, and that was like taken from like some, I don't know, like a Lebanese or something, like TV interview from like months before. And she was not saying that at all. It was totally, it was not that idea at all. What she was saying was that, as a medical professional, I'm going to be there. There's going to be a line of fire. I might get killed. That's not saying that you're being set out. It's just like stuff like that. They did it themselves. They did it themselves. And that's another thing, like whatever way that the airstrike in the hospital breaks, like you have to at least concede that the propaganda campaign coming out of Israel, it is so imbecilic. I mean, like, first of all, one of that guys, the guy that's like the mouthpiece for Netanyahu, there's like videos of them like hugging, and Netanyahu says, this man, he works for me, produces media content. He spoke at his wedding. They're very close. Yeah. He's a Netanyahu mouthpiece. As soon as the strike occurs in the hospital, he tweets out, there has been an Israeli strike in the hospital that was done because there was a terror cell within the hospital. And the reason why we did it is because, there were weapons, there were militants. And isn't it, the way he said, it's heartbreaking that Hamas continues to use human shields and causes this destruction, right? They literally said that. Then the IDF says, oh, we have proof that, no, it wasn't us. It was somebody else. Here's the video. And it's a video that's dated 40 minutes after the strike. Look, I'm sorry, but if you feel miffed that people prejudged you after you level all the medical infrastructure once, twice, did a bunch of damage already. There's already 20 medical facilities that were destroyed prior, in this siege alone, in the past 2 weeks, prior to this hospital being destroyed. If you feel prejudged, you better stop being fucking sloppy. You better stop saying that you're going to commit war crimes right before you start committing any number of war crimes, of which this might be one, just one out of many, many, right? Like this, this all like falls back on your shoulders in these ways.
Yeah, well, and the thing I was going to say earlier is the thing that I would caution against is that the the pro-Palestinian side does not rest on Israel having been culpable and responsible in the hospital bombing.
Of course, of course, exactly.
There's no reason to over invest in Israel guilt and culpability here, because it does look embarrassing for your side if you go so hard on that and then the ultimate investigation like ends up. I mean, weird things do happen in life. I mean, like the fog of war is real and something that you have to take seriously, especially as an amateur watching like cell phone videos that people are taking and drone footage and shit like that. Like there's no, like the fact that this fits Israel's pattern. I mean, like that's a solid heuristic, but it's just a heuristic, it's not determinative. So, but where I think the useful point in all of this is the fact that the first impulse of somebody attached to the Israeli propaganda apparatus was to take credit for it and to say, "Oh, we were right to do it. This was perfectly
exactly."
justified."
And it's the same justification as always.
That's the point of entry to normal people. It's not look at this horrible thing that Israel did. It's look at this. The like doing horrible things is already like it's pre-digested by them. It is like they have already built in justifications for something that may turn out to be horrible if they do it. It is like just like when you think about trying to justify Israel and make excuses for them, consider that like if this had been them, they would have made excuses for it. Like they publicly showed that like out in the open. So like the ways that they try to justify it and say, oh, it was human shields, oh, there was munitions there, oh, it was this, oh, that was that, maybe apply a little more scrutiny to when they say these things in the future, because like even if they weren't culpable, the fact that they were willing to take credit for it and say that they were right to do it tells you something about the Israeli moral position in this phenomenon in the first place. And I think that is more effective at winning hearts and minds than like insisting that it has to have been Israel, because like I mean, I spent like 2 days like deep in this like OSINT shit that people are doing, like, and it's really not clear to me. Like, it really does seem like more damage and more death than a Palestinian rocket is typically capable of inflicting, but less damage and like uncharacteristic damage of Israeli munitions. It's the kind of thing that is almost there to drive online sleuths crazy. And maybe Palestinians, like maybe Islamic Jihad was not bullshitting when they said they had the Batter 4 rockets. Maybe this was an Israeli munition and it just exploded in like an unorthodox way. You don't know. We don't know. The only way to really prove this shit is to have somebody go in with like swabs and test for like chemical residues and really,
and that's the thing. Israel would never, ever, 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 ever allow that to happen. If you start coming in, like if the UN decides to come in with some fucking swabs, they're gonna get vaporized. No way. All the best that you could get is you have the US releasing a statement. Our intelligence suggests blah blah blah, and of course they don't release it, right? So I'm waiting for some kind of release. I'm waiting for some kind of leak. And I mean, to your point, there is this kind of like odd in between state where there's definitely, I think, evidence of both sides. Like some of the people that I know, as well as like people online, they're definitely right now like Israel is like running victory laps. Like yeah, look what the U.S. said. Yeah, it's confirmed. But it's like, okay, well, first of all, this actually is not consistent with like typical rocket fire from from Hamas or like whatever. It's also not entirely consistent with IDF strikes. But then again, there are IDF munitions that they've used even in this siege that does not necessarily cause a lot of damage, but doesn't necessarily cause a crater. There's the fact that right now, like I wasn't talking about this stuff like publicly or like even with people because there was no real confirmation. It was just like tweets or whatever. But the people it's under the auspices of some sort of a Baptist group, right? Because it's like I think it's like a Christian hospital, right? So it's run by some kind of Christian group. And there was like for the last 2 days, like there's like these tweets coming out, like, oh, they're saying now that they received all these phone calls that you have to evacuate this hospital because we're going to strike it, or we're going to strike like right in the vicinity, or like whatever. And now, like I just before we sat down, I was just checking to see like some updates, and there's now you see like these like old men that are clearly like like old clergy or whatever from the church. Like I didn't watch it yet, so don't take it as gospel, but I will watch it after the show, where they're like sitting down in some kind of press conference or whatever, like indicating like, yes, this is what the IDF told us, and soon after that there was this thing that occurred. So it now becomes this like weird state where it's like, well, if the IDF did say they were going to do the strike, now you have like the possibility of a preemptive thing happening from a militant group, which is like, well, you can't say that, Israel would be totally absolved, in that situation, even if they did not do the strike as, like in the sense of like, look, if there was no, Hamas that you propped up, right, and there was a Palestinian state, there would not be a situation where you're in Gaza and maximizing the chances of either intentional or unintentional things going haywire, right? That's just kind of like the basic line. The same with that when we look at something like, the murder of Trayvon Martin, one of the egregious things is like, yeah, I mean, Zimmerman did go out of his way to follow him. He did go out of his way to actively put himself in a situation where honestly he should just like not be, right? You should not be in these situations because things could spiral out of control, and then either you're going to get killed or someone else is going to get killed. And if you're the one doing the killing, that does not mean that you don't have to think about it ever again, right? There is guilt, right? There is, you were in a bad situation. So there's always this like effect of maximization. We're always maximizing the chances of something crazy happening. And this is just like one. And I want to just stress again and again to people watching this, one hospital, especially with as many casualties, is bad, but focus on the slow asphyxiation. Thousands of people have already been killed. This hospital is a small fraction of the total. It's a small fraction of the total of children. It's going to be an ever smaller, diminishing fraction of the whole as time goes on. Keep that in mind. This is not like hinging your identity on this. Like, let Israel do that. Let Israel hinge its identity in this whole thing. If it wants to like vaporize itself, if it breaks in the wrong direction, let them do it, right? Palestinians don't have to do that. But again, I totally understand the inclination to want it to be that way, not only from the perspective of like it's symbolic and important, but also, like if the IDF is responsible, I feel like the ground offensive is off, right? If it becomes definitive that, this is the way that it happened, the Arab states that you signed this normalization agreements with, they're not going to back you. The U.S. might have to pull back some funding, right? Things are going to start to spiral out of control in that way. You've already delayed the ground offensive a couple of times. This will be, the nail in the coffin in that. So, like even from a strategic standpoint, I can understand just in terms of like, let's have a ceasefire right away. Let's minimize casualties. Obviously, from that perspective, Israel being responsible is better in that regard, right? If you want to use that kind of terminology, right? It does minimize casualties going forward.
I will agree with that. Yeah. But and then supposedly Biden, I read, I think it was the Times out of England that said that Biden had sort of privately given his approval to Netanyahu for a ground invasion. So it's certainly, I mean, they have delayed it, but it seems like they just can't. They can only delay for so long, or especially with this unity cabinet and what was his name, Gantz. He's not really any better than Netanyahu.
All these people are such psychopaths.
He's less overtly genocidal and megalomaniacal than Netanyahu, but he's basically the same guy, just not with a bunch of corruption charges attached to him.
I love it when like Jews or Israelis are like, I'm not a supporter of Netanyahu, but it's like, what are you talking about? There's literally nothing else. That's the thing. Like Netanyahu is so, and I wonder if there's a lesson for this in America in terms of a possible future for us, where Netanyahu is so inevitable. The right-wing shift, the kind of crazy images that we've been seeing the last 2 years of just like random Palestinians getting beat up, spat upon, kids getting murdered, settlers, just like so many videos of just settlers like with like automatic weapons, point blank, an unarmed Palestinian getting shot, right, because they're having some kind of argument. The police forces come over and they support, right, the guy doing the shooting. Almost no punishments ever for anything like this. This is what we've been seeing. And this feels like so inevitable because if you foreclose the possibility of like a Palestinian state, Ariel Sharon, when he pulled out of Gaza, right, one of his stated explicit reasons for, pulling out of Gaza was if we eliminate the Gaza occupation, which of course is also a misnomer because, I mean, there's still a blockade. There's still like some level of control over Gaza. It's not a functional state. There's still a kind of, even like legally speaking, you can make the case perhaps there's an occupation. But he said, we're going to pull out of Gaza because if we do that, he said, watch. There's not going to be any more discussion of a Palestinian state. And that turned out to be true. There was no more discussion of a Palestinian state. After Camp David, after Taba, that was it. Any other like, two-state peace plans, they were always just total jokes, right? They were always stupid. They were always non-starters for literally everybody involved. So
they were a distraction.
Yeah. Like how many people talk about, like, they still talk about, the Olmert two-state solution, which is like, if you read the terms, it's like the West Bank is like split up into like 80 districts that Israel still controls. The motion is like, what are you talking about? This is not a state.